The day my son was born should have been the happiest moment of my life. Instead, it became the day my father showed me just how little he thought of me and my child. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 29 years old, and for most of my life, I've been the disappointment in my father's eyes. Growing up, nothing I did was ever enough for him. If I got an A, he asked why it wasn't an A+. If I worked hard, he said I was still behind others. If I tried to build something on my own, he called it a waste of time. He always compared me to other people, other sons, other families, other lives. And no matter how much I achieved, I was never the one he was proud of. But everything changed the moment I held my son in my arms. The hospital room was quiet, soft beeping machines, warm yellow lights. My wife Emily lay exhausted but smiling, and in my hands was the smallest, most perfect life I had ever seen. My son, my responsibility, my legacy, my chance to build something better than what I grew up with. I looked down at him and whispered, "I promise you, you'll never feel what I felt growing up." I meant it. That moment should have stayed pure. But then my father walked in. He didn't knock. He didn't ask. He just pushed the door open like he owned the place, like he always did. He looked at the baby, then at me, and let out a small, sarcastic laugh. "Well," he said, crossing his arms, "let's hope he turns out better than you." The room went silent. I felt something inside me tighten. Emily looked uncomfortable. My mother looked down at the floor. And my father just stood there, smirking like it was a harmless joke. But it wasn't a joke. Not to me. I stayed quiet at first, because for 29 years, that's what I had always done. Stayed quiet, swallowed it, moved on. But this time, it wasn't about me. He looked at my newborn son again and said, "Honestly, with your track record, I don't have high expectations." That was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not in anger, not in rage, but in clarity. I looked down at my son again. Tiny fingers, closed eyes, completely innocent. And I realized something powerful. My father had spent my entire life trying to define my worth, but he would never define my son's. Never. I stood up slowly, still holding my baby. I looked straight at my father, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the failure he always said I was. I felt in control. "You're wrong," I said calmly. He raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" I took a step closer. "You don't get to decide who he becomes, and you definitely don't get to judge me anymore." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, please, Ethan. You can barely support yourself. And now you have a kid? What are you going to do, teach him how to fail too?" My grip tightened slightly around my son, but my voice stayed steady, because he didn't know something I had been building quietly for years. Something he had ignored, something he never believed I could do. I leaned in slightly and said the words that would change everything. "Then maybe you should check your account." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer. I just watched him. And for the first time in my life, he looked confused. My mother looked between us nervously. Emily whispered, "Ethan, what's going on?" I kissed her forehead gently and said, "Trust me," because I knew what was about to happen. I had been waiting for this moment for years. My father pulled out his phone, still annoyed. "This better not be some stupid joke," he muttered as he opened his banking app. A few seconds passed, then his face changed. The smirk disappeared. His eyes widened slightly. His posture shifted. He went completely silent. "What is this?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at him, because for the first time in 29 years, my father wasn't looking down at me. He was looking up, and that was only the beginning. My father stared at his phone like it was lying to him. His fingers trembled slightly as he refreshed the screen again and again and again. But the numbers didn't change. They couldn't, because they were real. "What is this?" he asked again, his voice no longer confident, no longer loud. This time, it was quiet, almost nervous. I adjusted my grip on my newborn son and looked at him calmly. "That," I said, "is a transfer." His eyes shot up to mine. "A transfer from who?" I didn't rush my answer. I wanted him to feel it, to understand it. From me. Silence. The kind of silence that fills a room when everything someone believed suddenly collapses. My father blinked, trying to process it. "You," he scoffed weakly. "You don't have that kind of money." I tilted my head slightly. "You sure about that?" He looked back at the phone, then back at me, then back at the phone again. His jaw tightened, because the amount sitting in his account wasn't small. It was more than he had ever expected from me, more than he had ever believed I was capable of earning. "Why, would you send me this?" he asked, his voice now careful. There it was, the shift. For the first time in my life, he wasn't talking to me like I was beneath him. He was asking. I took a slow breath and looked down at my son. "Because," I said quietly, "I just bought your house." The room froze. Emily's eyes widened. My mother covered her mouth, and my father, he didn't move. "You... what?" he whispered. "I paid off your mortgage," I said calmly, "and I bought the remaining ownership from the bank." His face drained of color. "That's not possible." "It is," I replied. "You signed the final notice 3 months ago. You were behind on payments. The bank was preparing to take the house." He swallowed hard. He knew I was telling the truth because he had hidden those letters, ignored those warnings, pretended everything was fine, just like he always did. "But why would you..." he started. "Because, despite everything," I cut in gently, "you're still my father." He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as the problem child, not as the disappointment, but as someone he didn't understand anymore. "I didn't do it for you," I continued. "I did it for her." I nodded toward my mother. "She doesn't deserve to lose her home because of your pride." My father's shoulders dropped slightly. That hit him harder than anything else, because deep down, he knew it was true. "You always said I was irresponsible," I said softly, "that I would never be able to build anything on my own." I looked him straight in the eyes. "So I built something without you." His lips parted, but no words came out. For once, he had nothing to say. I stepped a little closer, my son still in my arms. "You don't get to stand here," I continued, calm and steady, "and judge my child when you never even saw who I became." Emily watched me silently, her eyes filled with emotion. She had seen the long nights, the sacrifices, the risks I took building my business from nothing. She knew what this moment meant. "I started with nothing," I said. "No support, no approval, no safety net. I worked nights. I built my company from a tiny rented room. I failed more times than I can count, but I kept going. I took a breath, and now, I'm here." My father looked down again at his phone, at the proof, at the reality he could no longer deny. You really did all this?" he asked quietly. I nodded once. "Yes." Another long silence filled the room. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy with judgment. It was filled with realization. For 29 years, he had seen me as weak, as a failure, as someone who would never amount to anything. And in one single moment, that image shattered. He looked at my son again. But this time, there was no mockery, no sarcasm, no judgment. Only something new, something uncertain. Maybe even respect. "I didn't know," he said, his voice low. "I know," I replied, "because he never tried to know." I gently placed my hand on my son's back. "His life won't be like mine," I said softly. "He won't grow up feeling like he's never enough." My father's eyes dropped to the floor, and for the first time in my entire life, he looked ashamed. "I was wrong," he said quietly. The words felt strange in the air, like something that had never existed before. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate, because this wasn't about winning. It was about truth. "You don't get to decide his future," I said. "But you do get to decide who you become from this moment on." I paused. "That part is still up to you." He nodded slowly, still processing, still realizing, still changing. I turned back toward Emily and gently kissed her forehead. "We're going home," I said softly. She nodded. As I walked toward the door, my father spoke again. "Ethan." I stopped, but didn't turn around. "Thank you," he said. His voice cracked slightly. I closed my eyes for a brief second, not because I needed his gratitude, but because for the first time, he finally saw me. And as I stepped out of that hospital room, holding my son in my arms, I knew something had changed forever. But I also knew this wasn't the end of our story. Not yet. I took a slow breath and looked him straight in the eyes. "From the business you said would fail." He froze. For a second, he didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak. The silence in that hospital room grew heavy. "You what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shifted my son gently in my arms and spoke calmly. "You remember when I left my job 5 years ago? When you told everyone I was irresponsible? That I was throwing my life away?" His jaw tightened. "That was different. You had no plan." I shook my head slowly. "No. I had a plan. You just never cared to ask what it was." I could feel my heartbeat steady and strong. Not angry, not nervous, just clear. "For the last 5 years," I continued, "I've been building a logistics company. Small at first, just me and a laptop, then 2 clients, then 10, then a team." Emily looked at me with soft pride. She had been there through it all. Late nights, rejections, moments where I almost gave up, but I didn't. "I took risks," I said. "I learned everything I could. I failed. I fixed it. I grew it." My father stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "And last year, a national distributor partnered with us. That deal tripled our revenue in 6 months." He blinked hard. "You're lying," he said automatically. I gave a small, tired smile. "You've been saying that my whole life." I took a step closer. "But here's the part you'll understand best," I said. "Numbers." I gently reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. I placed it on the small hospital table in front of him. "Open it." He hesitated, then unfolded it. His eyes scanned the page, and I watched the exact moment the truth hit him. His fingers started to tremble. That valuation," he whispered. I nodded. "That's the company you said would collapse in 6 months." The paper slipped slightly in his hand. You built this?" "Yes." "How much of it do you own?" 70%. The air shifted. For 29 years, my father had looked at me like I was below him. But right now, that balance was breaking. He looked back at his phone again, then at the document, then at me. "So this money is the amount you invested in my failure years ago," I said calmly. "With interest." His face went pale again. I barely remember that," he admitted. "I don't," I said quietly. "It was the only time you ever gave me anything without criticism attached." My mother's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Ethan, you did all this?" I nodded gently. "I did." Emily squeezed my arm softly. My father sat down slowly in the chair beside the hospital bed. For the first time in my entire life, he didn't look powerful. He looked small. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. I thought about that question for a moment. Then I answered honestly, "Because you never listened." The words hung in the air. "I tried," I continued. "I told you about my plans, my ideas, my progress. But every time, you shut me down before I could finish." He looked down at his hands. "I thought you'd fail," he admitted. "I know," I said. There was no anger in my voice anymore. Just truth, just distance. I looked down at my son, sleeping peacefully in my arms. "And that's exactly why I didn't say anything," I added. "Because I didn't build this for you to believe in me." I lifted my eyes back to him. "I built this so my son would never need your approval to feel worthy." My father closed his eyes. A single tear slipped down his face. I had never seen that before. Not once. "I was wrong about you," he said. The words were heavy, real. Late, but real. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "You were." The room stayed quiet. No one moved. No one spoke. Because there was nothing left to argue. Nothing left to prove. For the first time in my life, my father knew exactly who I was. Not the version he created in his mind, But the real version, the one who built something from nothing, the one who didn't give up, the one who became stronger because of every doubt he ever faced. And as I stood there, holding my newborn son in my arms, I realized something powerful. I didn't need his approval anymore. I never did. And now, he finally understood that. The hospital room felt different now. The air was heavier, quieter, almost like something invisible had shifted between us. My father sat there, staring at his phone, then at the paper, then back at me, like he still couldn't accept what was right in front of him. For 29 years, he had controlled every conversation, every decision, every opinion about me. But not anymore. He cleared his throat. "So, this money you sent me," he said slowly. "What is it exactly for?" I answered calmly. "It's the amount you once gave me when I started. The money you said I'd waste." His jaw tightened slightly. "And the extra?" "Interest," I said. "And closure." The word closure hit him harder than the money ever could. He leaned back in the chair, like the weight of it had finally landed on his chest. "You're paying me back?" he asked. "No," I replied softly. "I'm freeing myself." Silence. My mother covered her mouth, holding back tears. Emily watched me quietly, her eyes full of pride and relief, because she knew how long I had carried this, how many nights I had doubted myself, how many times I almost believed the things my father said about me. "I never needed your money," I continued. "But I needed you to stop holding it over my head." He didn't respond, because he knew it was true. For years, that one small investment had been his weapon. Every argument ended with, "I paid for your start. I gave you that chance. You owe me, but not anymore. Not after today." My father slowly stood up. He looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time, "You've changed," he said. I shook my head gently. "No. I finally became who I always was. You just never saw it." He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something else. An apology maybe, an explanation, but nothing came out. Because deep down, he knew words weren't enough anymore. I walked over to Emily and gently handed her our son. Then I turned back to my father. "There's one more thing," I said. He looked up. "What?" I took out my phone, opened an email, and turned the screen toward him. It was a contract, a property contract, with his name on it. His eyes widened. "What is this?" "This," I said calmly, "is the house you're living in." He frowned. "What about it?" I looked straight into his eyes. "I own it now." The silence that followed was louder than anything that had been said all day. My mother gasped softly. Emily's eyes widened slightly. And my father, he went completely still. "You're joking," he said weakly. I shook my head. "No. 6 months ago, when your mortgage went into default, the bank sold the debt." His breathing became heavier, and I bought it. He took a step back, like the ground beneath him had shifted. You bought my house?" "Yes." "Why would you do that?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. I answered honestly, "Because I knew one day this moment would come." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once, twice. "This is insane," he muttered. "You can't just take my home." "I'm not taking it," I said calmly. "I'm giving you a choice." He stopped walking, looked at me. "What choice?" I took a step closer, my voice steady, calm, controlled. "You can stay in that house, live there peacefully. No debt, no pressure." His face showed confusion. "And what's the catch?" he asked. I held his gaze. "The catch is respect." Silence. Deep, heavy silence. "You will never speak to me like you used to again," I continued. "You will never insult my wife, and you will never ever look down on my son." My voice didn't rise, but every word landed, hard. "And if I don't agree?" he asked quietly. I answered just as quietly. "Then you'll have 60 days to find somewhere else to live." My mother started crying softly. "Please, don't do this," she whispered. I looked at her gently. "I'm not hurting him," I said. "I'm setting boundaries." My father stood there, frozen between pride and reality, between the man he used to be and the man he needed to become. Finally, he lowered his head, and for the first time in my life, my father said the words I had waited my entire childhood to hear. "I'm sorry, Ethan." The room went still, because those words didn't come from pride. They came from truth. I nodded once, not smiling, not celebrating, just accepting. "Then we understand each other," I said. And in that moment, the power didn't belong to him anymore. It didn't belong to the past. It didn't belong to the pain. It belonged to me and to the future I was building for my son. My father's apology didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years. It didn't undo the damage. It didn't suddenly turn him into a different man. But it did something important. It ended the illusion that he still had power over me. The hospital room was quiet again. Different kind of quiet this time. Not tense. Not explosive. Just real. My father stood there, his shoulders lower than I had ever seen them. "I'm sorry, Ethan," he said again, softer this time. I believed him, but belief didn't mean trust. Not yet. I walked over to Emily and gently wrapped my arm around her shoulder. She leaned into me slightly, holding our son close, that tiny life in her arms. That was my responsibility now, not my father's approval. Not his opinions, not his expectations, just my family. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," I said calmly, looking at my father. "I'm asking you to be respectful." He nodded slowly. "I can do that." I studied his face for a moment. For years, I had tried to earn his respect by becoming what he wanted. But now, I had earned it by becoming who I needed to be. My mother stepped forward, tears still in her eyes. "I'm proud of you, Ethan," she whispered. Those words hit me harder than anything else that day, because I had waited my entire life to hear something like that from one of them. I smiled softly. "Thank you, Mom." My father hesitated, then spoke again. "Can I hold him?" He looked at my son, not with judgment this time, not with sarcasm, but with something unfamiliar. "Got it." I looked at Emily. She looked at me, and then she gave a small nod. I stepped closer and gently placed my son in my father's arms. He held him awkwardly at first, like he didn't trust himself. Then slowly, his expression softened. "He's small?" he said quietly. I gave a faint smile. "Yeah, I was too once." That sentence hung between us, because we both knew what it meant. I was small once, and I needed a father who believed in me, but I didn't get that, so I made a silent promise right there in that hospital room. My son would. "You don't have to be perfect," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But if you're going to be in his life, you're going to be a good influence." My father nodded, still looking down at the baby. "I understand." And for the first time, I believed he actually did. A nurse knocked lightly and stepped into the room, checking on Emily and the baby. Normal hospital routine, normal life continuing. But for me, nothing about this moment was normal. This was the day everything changed, because I realized something powerful. Revenge isn't always about destroying someone. Sometimes, it's about outgrowing them. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to humiliate him. I didn't need to prove my worth anymore, because my life, my success, my family already did that. I walked over to the window and looked outside. The sky was clear, bright, open. For so many years, I felt like I was trapped under my father's shadow. Like no matter what I did, I would never step into the light. But I was wrong. The light was always there. I just had to walk toward it on my own. Behind me, I heard my father speaking softly to my son. His voice was different now. Gentler, careful, like he was afraid to make the same mistakes again. Maybe he would change. Maybe he wouldn't. That part wasn't in my control. And for the first time, I was okay with that. Because my life didn't depend on his approval anymore. It depended on the choices I made. The father I chose to be. The example I set. I turned back toward my family. Emily smiled.